Moses wasn't looking for adventure. Anyone watching his life at that moment would say he'd retired early. Desert edition. He had a quiet job, a quiet routine, and a quiet sheep audience that never sent feedback surveys. His days were predictable in the best way: sunrise, grazing, silence, repeat. If life had a low-stress mode, he was living it. And then, out of nowhere, the universe introduced plot. It started with something small, the kind of thing most people would walk past without noticing. But Moses was bored enough to look twice. A bush was on fire, and somehow not burning. It was the kind of detail you'd expect in a fantasy movie trailer, not in the middle of another Tuesday in the desert. At first, he assumed it was just heat messing with his eyes. Desert hallucination? Sunstroke? Maybe the sheep finally got to him. But the longer he stared, the more the bush insisted on being weird. Flames, yes. Smoke, no. Leaves, still there, suspiciously intact. Then came the voice. It wasn't a soft hey or a gentle whisper. No atmospheric music, no slow zoom. Just a direct, very unsubtle call of his name that instantly turned the desert into the world's most dramatic stage. Moses froze. The sheep froze. Even the wind seemed to freeze, probably thinking, this escalated fast. This is the part most people treat as inspirational. But if someone re-watched the scene with modern eyes, it looks a lot less like a peaceful spiritual moment and a lot more like someone getting voluntold into a job they never applied for. The bush, still on fire, still not burning, basically gave Moses a divine notification. Your life is about to change. Please step forward. Moses was not thrilled. He didn't politely say, "Here I am." He didn't nod in confidence. He didn't pump his fist like a movie hero. No. He panicked internally and immediately tried to negotiate his way out. He gave excuses. Many. Rapid fire. Wrong person, wrong job, wrong era, wrong skill set. If there were forms to sign, he would have checked the "I do not agree" box 12 times. Imagine someone getting selected for a massive corporate responsibility, and their first response is, "Are you sure this email wasn't meant for someone else?" That was Moses. But the call didn't back down. The mission stood there, on fire, waiting. And that's the detail people rarely mention. Moses almost rejected the entire story before it even started. The hero moment wasn't him stepping forward. The hero moment was him not sprinting in the opposite direction. He finally accepted, or at least stopped arguing long enough to be volunteered officially. And just like that, the calm desert life ended. Quiet mode off. Plotline activated. What Moses didn't know is that this wasn't his last almost failed. It was merely the opening episode. Moses didn't walk away from the burning bush feeling like a chosen hero. If anything, he walked like someone who had just been informed he would be managing a crisis no one else wanted to handle. His steps were slow, heavy, and full of the internal monologue of a man trying to convince himself this was not actually happening. He knew what the assignment required. He just didn't like any part of it. Going back to Egypt wasn't nostalgic. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't even dramatic. It was simply a place he did not want to return to, a city full of memories, politics, and one extremely powerful person he would rather avoid forever. Still, the mission was clear, which made it worse. Tell Pharaoh to let the people go. One sentence, short, direct. Exactly the kind of task that sounds easy until you remember Pharaoh exists. When Moses tried to explain the situation at home, the conversation became a 3-minute highlight reel of hesitation. He argued, doubted, rephrased, unphrased, and circled around the problem like a man trying to escape his own destiny with grammar. Aaron watched all of this quietly. Every pause, every sigh, every, "Are you sure I'm the right guy?" And somewhere during that emotional tornado, Aaron understood the truth. He would be the one doing most of the talking. Not because he was chosen for it, but because Moses absolutely did not want to open his mouth in front of Pharaoh. So unofficially, but very clearly, Aaron became the spokesperson. If ancient Israel had HR departments, he'd be listed as communications team, entire staff. Meanwhile, Egypt continued operating under Pharaoh's favorite leadership style. Unyielding confidence combined with corporate-level ego. He was the type of man who would argue with an airport gate agent just to maintain dominance over a delayed flight he couldn't control. Imagine Moses, who didn't want the job, walking straight into that personality. The palace was as intimidating as ever. Tall columns, silent guards, the kind of tension that makes any normal person double-check their life choices. Even the air felt heavier, like it knew a confrontation was coming. This is where the mission transformed from simple request to geopolitical disaster waiting to unfold. Egypt's entire system depended on the very people Moses was supposed to liberate. Asking Pharaoh to release them was basically asking an empire to run without its engine. But Moses and Aaron walked in anyway, not confidently, not heroically, just inevitably. The moment they stood before Pharaoh, Moses felt every ounce of pressure land on him at once. His nerves sparked, his thoughts scrambled. Aaron prepared to speak, but Moses, overwhelmed, opened his mouth first, and that was the beginning of the first public near failure of the entire operation, a moment that would echo through the rest of the journey. When Moses and Aaron finally stood before Pharaoh, the room felt like a bad meeting scheduled on a Monday morning, tense, doomed, and already behind. The request was simple: let the people go. But simple requests don't survive long in Egypt, especially when the man in charge enjoys saying no like it's a personal hobby. The first conversation collapsed instantly. Not slowly, not politely, just collapsed. Pharaoh didn't just refuse, he made the workload heavier, turning daily labor into something between disaster and punishment. Bricks, straw, deadlines, everything got worse. And the people? They were furious. Not at Pharaoh, at Moses. Whispers spread, he made it worse. Glares increased, he shouldn't have come back. Complaints multiplied faster than the problems he was trying to fix. Even Moses stared at the situation, like someone who opened a fix this problem assignment and somehow triggered 12 new problems instead. It was the ancient equivalent of being hired to solve a crisis and watching the entire office catch fire in your first week. He questioned every step that got him here. The mission, his ability, his timing, the burning bush that volunteered him without asking. But the mission didn't pause, because then came the plagues. Not the dramatic, clean-cut version people imagine today. The real thing looked more like a slow political pressure test, mixed with very inconvenient environmental events. Water turning to blood wasn't a victory. It was a nationwide panic alert. Frogs invading every surface wasn't triumph. It was sleep deprivation for everyone. Lice, flies, sickness, hail, darkness. Each plague turned the nation into a place where no one wanted to wake up the next morning. And every time a plague hit, Pharaoh reacted the same way. He wavered. Not enough to agree, not enough to give in, just enough to create false hope before snapping back into his default answer. Still no. If someone graphed his decisions, the chart would look like a heart monitor having a bad day. Up, down, maybe, never mind, almost. Absolutely not. With every false shift, Moses lost moral ground. People didn't see divine strategy. They saw inconsistency, delay, and pain. He became the face of progress that never arrived. And while all this unfolded, Moses stood between an empire refusing to move and a nation blaming him for the consequences. Leadership wasn't heroic, it was exhausting. Every plague pushed tension higher, and every delay made him look less like a deliverer and more like a man trapped between impossible expectations. This was the part nobody turns into inspirational posters, the phase where everything gets worse, where the leader stumbles, doubts grow louder, and the mission feels like a losing game. The part where Moses almost loses control of the entire situation. And the story was still climbing toward chaos. When the people finally marched out of Egypt, they imagined celebration, relief, maybe even a peaceful walk under open skies. What they got instead was panic, fast, loud, and contagious. They reached the edge of the Red Sea just in time to discover that the sea was very real, and very in the way. Behind them, the army was approaching. In front of them, a massive body of water refused to move aside politely. It didn't take long for the complaints to start, then multiply, then form a full committee of frustration. People looked at Moses like he was the project manager of a doomed expedition. They panicked in waves, talked over each other, questioned decisions, questioned the mission. and just to complete the experience, questioned why they ever listened to Moses in the first place. Support level, 0. Pressure level, maximum. Moses stood there holding the weight of thousands of voices all saying the same thing. We're trapped. It was the ancient equivalent of leading a team in meltdown, with absolutely no backup plan, no resources, and no corporate handbook explaining what to do when an entire empire is chasing you. The moment didn't feel heroic. It felt impossible. But Moses stepped forward anyway, not confidently, not boldly, not like the dramatic illustrations people draw centuries later. He stepped forward like someone who has run out of options and is too stressed to argue anymore. The miracle wasn't instant. The sea didn't open with fireworks or dramatic soundtrack. It took time, slow, heavy, terrifying time. Wind roared, water shifted. The path began to appear, uneven and unpredictable, and people didn't cross in perfect formation. They rushed, stumbled, shouted, doubted, and moved with the collective energy of a crowd that isn't convinced this is a good idea, but is too scared to stay behind. Moses walked too, terrified, aware of every splash and every shadow. He didn't feel fearless, he felt responsible. The fear didn't disappear, he simply walked through it, and that irony is the center of the whole moment. The mission only works when Moses stops trying to control everything. The sea opens when he lets go of perfection. The people move when he stops trying to look like the hero. The path becomes visible when he finally admits he has no plan except trust. Behind them, the army continued the chase. In front of them, the sea walls trembled like they weren't entirely convinced about staying upright. The escape wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, and it definitely wasn't relaxing. But it worked. As the last group stepped onto solid ground, the danger still hovered in the air, reminding Moses that even after a miracle this huge, the risk wasn't over. Not yet. After the miracle at the Red Sea, anyone would expect silence, gratitude, maybe a collective, "Wow, that was close." But the crowd did what crowds do best. They complained immediately. Water had just stood up like walls. The impossible had just happened in front of thousands of witnesses. But the moment their sandals hit dry ground, the old behavior returned, right on schedule. People complained about hunger. People complained about thirst. People complained about walking too much. Some even complained about Moses, again, and Moses. He felt every complaint like a new weight on his shoulders. The miracle hadn't made leadership easier. If anything, it made expectations higher. Now that people had seen the impossible once, they assumed it should happen every Tuesday before lunch. Doubts came back fast. Crises resumed. Confidence dipped. Leadership felt as fragile as ever. Moses wasn't walking around glowing with heroic confidence. He was trying to manage a nation that didn't read instructions, didn't wait patiently, and didn't appreciate that surviving an empire and a sea crossing was kind of a big deal. The modern translation of his situation would sound like this: the miracle didn't fix everything. The man still had problems. And that's the part nobody emphasizes. Miracles don't erase reality. Victories don't eliminate struggle. Escaping Egypt didn't magically turn Moses into a perfect leader. He still doubted himself. He still battled frustration. He still carried the pressure of every decision. He still navigated a nation with the energy level of a group chat filled with overreactors. And yet, despite the doubts, the fear, the complaints, and the constant, "Are we there yet?" from thousands of voices, he kept going. That's the real message, the one hiding in the cracks of the story, the one that gets lost under dramatic artwork and simplified summaries. Moses didn't succeed because he was flawless. He succeeded because he didn't quit in the middle of chaos. He stumbled, he hesitated, he failed publicly, more than once, but he kept showing up. He kept moving forward even when people turned against him. He kept choosing purpose over panic. He kept walking even when the path was unclear. And in the end, that's what shapes the entire journey. Not perfection, but persistence inside the storm. The story doesn't end with him becoming untouchable. It ends with him continuing despite everything that didn't go right. A leader who didn't ask for the job. A man who almost failed multiple times. A mission that only worked because he remained in it. Now the question is simple. What biblical moment should I simplify next? David, Jonah, Samson,